The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Michael, we're back with yet another episode of The Unlikely Innovators. Again, had a great time talking to Kevin Oulds, co-founder of Willful. Lots to think about. What an amazing journey, starting with sort of some very visceral goings on in his life that sort of bred the necessity to go out and do something like this. I thought it was a really good chat.
Yeah, no, it was great. And I think, as we talked about with Kevin in our conversation, that I think one of the main reasons we wanted to have him on today was to talk about Willful and how they're disrupting, the digital legal innovation world. But also, I think having chat with him throughout his journey, I think there were a lot of things that we didn't know about Kevin before having him on, and kind of seeing how, unlikely I think his career path is to where he's currently in the sector he's in, but also how those experiences he's had along the way ultimately led him, to some of these decisions and some of these junctures in his timeline. So I think that's probably the best. And I think you pointed out that as far as unlikely innovators go, it was pretty unlikely from where he thought he would go potentially. So it's always great to get that personal journey and learn that as well. But I think obviously Willful, as a company, as a service in Canada, is doing some pretty incredible things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I'm going to actually steal one of his sayings, going from a vitamin to a painkiller when it comes to being useful to the audience that you're building a product for. So I think we're ready to hear more from Kevin Oulds.
We're back, and we're now pleased to be joined by Kevin Oulds, who is the co-founder and head of research and innovation at Willful. He started Willful after a family member's passing showed him how difficult it is to plan for death and wrap up somebody's life in a digital age. His mission is to ensure every Canadian adult has protected their family and planned their legacy by creating a solid estate plan. Prior to starting Willful, Kevin worked in construction and project management. He is a member of the Tech for Sick Kids advisory board at Sick Kids and is excited to bring his experience to his new role at the University Health Network Impact Collective, which aims to raise awareness and financial support for the UHN hospitals. His hobbies include golf and traveling, and he has visited 6 countries, and now he is a guest on the Unlikely Innovators. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. And just to point out something, you mentioned 6 countries. That would be not too exciting. It's been 6 continents. But,
yes. Sorry,
That's 6 countries.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
No, I've always been really excited about that fact that I need to visit Antarctica to hit every continent. But I just wanted to throw that out there because people are probably listening going, wow, 6 countries, world traveler.
Yeah, that's my bad. Because it does say I can confirm to the listeners and viewers that it does say continents. And but anyway, we'll probably have some questions about that a little bit later when we like to have a little fun at the end of the show to talk about some of your travels. But when we typically start the show, Steve and I always try to find a refined way to basically ask the guest, what did you want to be when you grew up? And sometimes we'll come up with a convoluted way of asking that, but sometimes it's just simpler to just ask. So, when you were younger, what kind of career path did you envision for yourself? Is this kind of what you thought, or did you have a different route that you thought you might take when you were a kid?
Well, like most Canadian kids growing up, obviously I thought I was going to play in the NHL. If you ask my dad, yeah, that was my direct career path was NHL. But that was something I always thought about when I was younger and maybe into my teens. But when I was growing up, it was hockey, and I used to do a little bit of acting. I thought I could maybe make a career out of that. Like as a child star, one day I auditioned for the 90s movie The Santa Claus with Tim Allen. Oh, yeah. And I auditioned for the head elf, and sadly I didn't get it. And that was one of the movies or TV shows that I didn't get, and kind of said, all right, maybe this is something that's not gonna pan out. But no, growing up, I was really unaware of what I wanted to do, and that carried into middle school and high school when you're being asked at a very young age, what do you want to do? Because you need to pick these courses at this age if you want to get into this class, to get into this career. And that freaked me out. So much anxiety because I really had no idea. And I wish there was more guidance around how to approach that, because I mean, you talk to a lot of adults, they don't even know what they want to do at some point. So it was definitely not on my radar to get into estate planning or even run a tech business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually, there's two points. One was that I was living in Mississauga when they were filming the Santa Claus in, the Toronto area at the time. And I remember there was a kid in our class, I think we were in grade 3 or 4, and he was an extra in the movie. And I remember when the movie came out, he had us come over to his house. He's like, "That's me. I'm the elf on the train." And we're like, "We can't even see your face. Like, how do we know that's you?" I'm sure it was him because, although kids
Why would you lie
so
about that?
why would you lie? But kids lie. So anyway, but the next point I was going to say is that Steve and I have talked about this like on the program previously, that just like, when we were younger going through the guidance council process, like they didn't really know what you could do with different educational options, right? For us, it was kind of like, you want to do this. So like, this is your one or your two options you can do. And if you don't like those, then I can't help you. Right. So I think hopefully we've come a long way since those days, but I totally relate to being kind of put in a box, but without kind of knowing what else existed beyond, what you were kind of told was the path you could take.
Yeah, I think some people will probably remember this. I think we're probably around the same age, right? So it was maybe grade 9. I remember there was a computer program that there was only a limited amount of computers at this time in the schools, but it was basically fill out these questions and it would spit out kind of suggestions on what career path you might take. And I remember it was something to do with hands-on art or trades, which was kind of in my realm because I was always quite handy, and my dad used to bring me into a lot of home improvement projects. So I've always been kind of geared towards fixing things, trades, and that was kind of the path that I stumbled into as a teenager, and then as a younger adult. And I did a lot of different jobs. I had a handful of jobs that I got into, and I think it was great because I feel like it made me pretty well-rounded. But yeah, you never know where your life's going to take you in terms of career. So it's good to have some options and some knowledge in different areas.
Yeah, and it would be such an interesting thing if we could never get our hands on those old aptitude tests that sort of placed you, because I wonder if you could plot, accuracy versus the prediction. I'm sure there's no correlation in those, because I remember, gosh, like I think mine said something to do with like biology, and I had no interest in biology. Um, like literally did not take a course of biology in high school, but they're like, this guy's a biologist. Well, maybe they know better than I do, but you consult the oracle to find out what you should be doing. But we did some we looked online before, like in preparation for this discussion, Kevin, and we noticed that you spent some time at colleges.
Mhm.
And had some education from colleges. We're kind of interested to know what programs you did end up taking, just to look at the chronology of where this go, and if any of that education sort of serves you now in your current career path.
Well, that's a great question. So keyword is some education. So just to be honest, growing up, I was not a good student. Not that I acted out or was, a terror in class, but school was difficult for me, and I guess it was maybe a blend of not knowing, my learning style at the time, and maybe teachers not understanding how to best approach me or get to me kind of thing. But school was really challenging. I was lucky to have a group of friends who were just like absolute geniuses in my mind. Basically straight A's. Some wouldn't even need to study for calculus tests. They were just leaps and bounds ahead of me. So having that friend group was really helpful for me to kind of just like continue on trying and pushing forward. And they would obviously help me here and there whenever I needed help on assignments. But we essentially went through school together, middle school, high school, and had the same friend group, and was in a lot of classes up until early high school, until they started taking, advanced calculus, which was just, I wanted to stay away from that at all costs. But
Same.
yeah. So again, with really not knowing what I wanted to do, I had a buddy who said, "Hey, I just got I got accepted to the program at Fanshawe, like Rec and Leisure Services. I think I want to be a gym teacher." And I was like, "That's pretty cool." I summers off would be all right, and we had a good relationship with our gym teacher, who was also our hockey coach, and I thought I could see my life as a gym teacher. So again, I just kind of went for it and learned about the other options. It was Rec and Leisure was focused on potentially being a gym teacher or working in older age kind of care facilities, which I was not sure about at the time, but I was interested to see what that looked like in the programming. So the one thing I will say is the school was great. My experience was awesome, but going in, I kind of started to learn what I didn't want to do, which is important. And it's important to recognize that as soon as possible. I know some people or parents are listening, they pay good money to go to school and they're freaking out. It's like, no, see it through. And in some cases that is a good choice. And it really comes down to your own personal kind of situation. But for me, I saw that, this wasn't really what I want to do. And it kind of trickled down into my studies and my want to be present and see this further. So could have done a few different things, I guess, but I didn't end up finishing. But when I came back after 1 year, I again went back to the trades kind of side of things, and I was talking to some other buddies who were discussing becoming a linesman and working in Toronto Hydro or for Hydro One kind of thing. And I said that's not bad. It's good money, dangerous job, and depending on where you are, like Sudbury might be extremely cold at most times during the winter. But that was kind of the next. All right, I can use this, and if I don't like hydro, I could turn it into being like an electrician or something. So I went and got my prerequisite to get accepted as a linesman. And once I did that program, I was essentially, I think I was pretty close to getting hired at Toronto Hydro and in 2008 or right before 2008. And we had the crazy housing disaster,
housing crisis,
and everything kind of like stopped. So they had a hiring freeze. So from there it was, okay, can't do that. I called my old boss at a cement plant where I used to work as a summer student and asked him if they were hiring, and he said, we'll get you in. And they asked me what my goals were there, and it was to get an electrical apprenticeship and go from there. But things turned out quite differently.
This is probably the best. So we always try and pick guests that have like the Unlikely Innovators sort of moniker built into their background. This so far is probably the best example and the most interesting example. So I'm excited to hear more. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's a perfect segue, Kevin, because obviously we talked about it in your bio, but obviously we want to talk about Willful today. And you mentioned in the bio like how the genesis for the company came about, but maybe in your own words for our listeners and viewers who haven't come across the company yet, can you talk a little bit about the origins of Willful and what Willful does to serve Canadians now?
Sure, absolutely. So before Willful was Willful, it was I essentially started a different company, and the company was called Final Blueprint, and I'll get back to that that name and how the company became what it is. But first of all, the name Final Blueprint, I get a lot of people who are they think it's like an architectural firm or something, but I used to work with a family member, my uncle, at the cement plant. He's the one who got me in. He was there for 30 years, and he was a well-respected man there. And I got into the plant pretty easy. And it came up when someone else got hired the same day. He said, like, hey, how long have you been waiting? I said, I don't know. I applied a week ago and I got in, basically. And they're like, well, I've been waiting a year. So my uncle had some pull there, I guess. But I was going to work one day, and I got a call, and it was essentially saying that my uncle passed away very unexpectedly, and it was the uncle that I worked with, and um, it shocked our family and kind of everyone at work. And from there, after kind of the dust settled, families are kind of thrown into this planning mode, and whether it's known or sudden, the passing of a family member, it's not easy to get through some of those questions that come up. So my aunt asked me to help out. So I kind of became the de facto assistant or executor, even though I wasn't the executor. I was the the talking point for my aunt with the company, with insurance companies, and all these questions started coming up earlier on from burial preparations. And when something suddenly happens, and you're asked these questions, you don't want to make the wrong decision. You don't want to second guess certain decisions. So I asked my aunt. I said, you were married for 40 years. How could you not have a conversation about death? Like it just boggled my mind, and that was way off, that off the table. That nope, we would avoid that. Just didn't come up. So that was kind of shocking to me, because I had a couple of health scares before this happened with my uncle, and I was already kind of thinking about this space, and if something happened to me, I wanted to make sure I had some sort of plan in place so that I didn't envision my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and my family fighting. But I found out from one of the guys at work, and they said, yeah, I talked with your uncle years ago on night shifts about this. He'd want to do this. And so I told my aunt. She was super happy. And after that, it was just more questions. What song should we play? Who should do this? And it was just, it broke my heart to see my aunt going through this and not knowing and second guessing herself. And there was also some pretty, I would say, heated arguments between our family members trying to decide or guess what my uncle would have wanted best. So after that, like I said, I had a couple experiences where it made me think of this space. And again, without getting into too much detail and try to be as quick as possible, I was involved in a big accident in the winter, and somebody was critically injured, and I had to do a first aid maneuver to one of their extremities, and they just were talking to me and saying, like, tell my wife I love her, and tell my son to be good, and I'll never forget it. But I basically, after I was released from the hospital, I came back to the house, or to our condo, and told Erin, my wife, hey, I'm starting a business in this space. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to figure it out. And that was kind of the process of how this came up. And again, talking about unlikely innovators, I couldn't, write a line of code. It was such an instrumental leap in my mind. But going back to trying to find what you want to do, this was something that I was passionate about. And to not sound like a cliche, that was something that was really resonating with me. This is okay. I'm passionate about this space and helping people not go through what our family did. But it really was kind of the driving force of like taking my current path and just, complete 180 to something different.
Yeah, that is a pretty unlikely story, but again, I think a great reason to get into it. And we'll have some more questions for you about the actual company. But one thing I did want to ask you, because I discovered Willful by watching a Dragon's Den recap. I didn't catch the original episode. I think it was in season 16 that you and Erin, your wife and your co-founder, pitched. Yep. But we had Manjeet Minhas on the show a few months back, so we got the behind the scenes of like what it's like for them and the long days they have taping. They hear dozens of pitches a day for like weeks on end. So like there's tons of pitches, and there's parts of the show that we obviously don't see because they have to trim it down. But like on the other side of the room, when you're pitching to these dragons, especially to your point earlier where you didn't know how to write a line of code, and now you're you're pitching for capital and things like this. Like, what was that experience like? If you can kind of walk us through, you know, arriving on the den floor and making your pitch to the Dragons.
Yeah, sure. So I listened to that episode with Manjeet, and she's awesome, very very impressive entrepreneur, and she was on our list to be careful with, because she was sometimes the most critical from what we saw. But I think, first of all, everyone in the early days was like, oh, you got to go on Dragon's Den and pitch, and it was no, they're gonna literally rip me apart. Like, we are way too early. So once we got to a certain point where we felt we could, you know, confidently back up our valuation and our numbers, it was a no-brainer to us. So yeah, going on the Dragon's Den was an amazing experience. It was for anyone else who's thinking about it, it's definitely I would recommend it, with the caveat of, you know, don't go on too early. But when you are thinking about it and you are potentially ready, you need to really really prepare. We did so much research. We watched well, I mean, we always watched the show growing up, or not growing up, but I think it's been on, to your point, 16 years. But we are always avid watchers of Dragon's Den and Shark Tank. So we just went back and watched a couple notable kind of pitches that were more in our space, you know, tech platforms or fintech or legal, anything like that. So we just prepared. We had our team, we had investors, we would do mock trials of pitching, and we would ask them to be ruthless with us, like, just, you know, hammer us with questions. And it's funny, I'll get back to it in a second, but after it was done, we were like, that wasn't as bad. And my wife and I both said, we kind of get more nervous about certain, like, some podcasts or journalist pitches, which some people would think that's nuts, but we just prepared. We at the time, my wife was pregnant, and we would literally walk around our town. We had our questions, our pitch, and we would just practice our pitch. And that was another thing, is again, sounding lame, practice makes perfect, and it just becomes natural. And we could basically do the entire pitch for say something happened to my wife, where it would be more likely me to mess up. She could say my whole part, and I could say her whole part. But yeah, the preparation was key, and we feel like, watching the episode again, we you know, successfully answered questions and held our own. But the Dragons, it can be intimidating, for sure, especially for people who haven't, you know, spoken in front of a camera or pitched before. And there's my thought was, okay, we're gonna get, you know, run out of town or something, because they said something and we couldn't think about it. It's going to be all over Canada. But you just got to kind of take that stuff out and just, you know, just go with what you practice and be confident that it's going to be successful.
Yeah, and not to jump all over the place here, but I think it would be beneficial to sort of understand there's a bit of a gap now in our story as we talk about this, between, you know, that sort of obviously visceral moments that caused you to have the idea, and how it got refined into something that can be pitched for investment. So maybe just tell us about the core sort of function of Willful as it stands today, and how that came about, maybe.
Yeah, I just realized I didn't add the how Final Blueprint became Willful.
Well, we also didn't ask, so
yeah.
so please go ahead.
So yeah, again, in the early days, this company, I made a site on Wix. It was, again, trying to find someone to build this. I had no money. I was an unknown person outside of being my wife's. You know, at the time, I was her boyfriend, who had a pretty good network in the Toronto tech scene. But I did go to co-founder dating. I went to every meetup, and I was just laser focused on finding a CTO to build this. But the actual platform in the early days, there was nothing legally binding. It was everything outside of a will. It was funeral preparations, things that you'd want to say on your like a goodbye tweet or your Facebook posts, and now Facebook and other tech platforms that people use every day have really put an emphasis on what happens when an account holder passes away. So before it was almost, I mean, Apple's the most strict platform that that is out there when it comes to getting access to an account. But this platform that I had, it was, I guess the best way to describe it, or one of our advisors described it this way, was it was a nice to have. It was a vitamin, it wasn't a painkiller. So I did find somebody to actually build a website. It took a while, but we launched it, and I was certain I was going to be the next Elon Musk or whatever. But it was crickets. Like, I think there was 20 people who signed up. Most of them were family members. So struggling with that for a while, and just trying to understand what's happening. Why aren't people buying this product or using it? That's when I really started to focus on building out a team. And at that time, to start that, it was a team of advisors who had expertise in areas that I didn't have. And then from there, it was, okay, this is great. This is an interesting space, but what's the painkiller? And that was the will. And that was, again, something where it was doing some research. 57% of Canadian adults don't have a will. Why not? It's expensive. Some lawyers don't have the best reputation. People are intimidated. So it was really trying to take that offline experience and put it in an online experience for digital natives like myself. And the way we looked at it is, we're building this because we're building this for us. Like, we are the core demographic. What would we want? And we really focused on people in that demographic, but also being inclusive of all ages and different demographics. How can we make this intuitive, accessible? And that was really the start of the focus from the nice to have to Willful, the proper company that it is today.
Yeah, and I think that I love the analogy vitamin to painkiller, because that's exactly when the sort of switch flips for a lot of tech companies, right? When you go for that window dressing to core in the walls concrete, right? I'm going to assume something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
but we go, so the pandemic starts to happen. You can't go and meet with your lawyer anymore. You have to stay at home. Will and estate planning sort of gets turned on its ear, I would imagine. What did that mean for Willful when that sort of started happening? Because you have an online experience; it's entirely remote. What does that mean for Willful at that point?
So, yeah, 2020, we were actually just started to fundraise. We were raising a seed round, and we had some great prospects. And as soon as COVID-19 started to become mainstream media and everywhere, I think a lot of investors started to hold on to their money and say, hey, listen, let's cool conversations for a bit and see where everything settles. So that was kind of the experience we had. It was great for us that we weren't in need. We wanted to raise money to expedite growth, but we were bummed. We were excited to get an influx of capital to hire some more people and experiment more with digital paid ads. And it was a bit of a gut shot. And what we started to see was, as the months progressed, we started to see a huge uptick in sales. Like, we saw a 600% increase in sales and traffic. So we went back to some of those earlier investors and say, hey, we think we should talk. And we started conversations again, and then we were successful in raising money. And we ended up, hiring some key people to help accommodate for this, this jump in traffic and customers. And the other point to kind of bring back to the main question is, it was a scary time for people. So, every day on the news, you heard how many deaths are happening. So people were scared. People were starting to look into estate planning and power of attorney documents. And we kind of said, we're here to help people, but we kind of paused our advertising. We didn't think it was very classy to kind of, jump on this. We did it I think in a tasteful way. But it was a wild time. But one of the biggest things that happened out of that, because our platform is online, but in Ontario and, well, at the time, the rest of Canada, you needed to print your will off and the other documents. But let's just stick with the will. You had to print it off and have two witnesses sign it in person. So that was a big no-no during COVID. So people were doing signings in their sunrooms with people outside freezing or wearing hazmat suits. It was pretty intense to hear the stories of people, and luckily the Ontario government and other governments around Canada, like provincially, they started to say, like, we need to change the rules right now to make a more digital experience. And BC, they amended, or they passed Bill 21, and it's in our opinion, it's the bill that has been the most accessible in Canada right now, and we applaud the Law Society of BC for what they did. But they've allowed for people to digitally sign, digitally store, and virtually witness their wills, which has been that's a new main focus at Willful. Is we're running a pilot. I'm running this pilot right now in BC for digital witnessing and signings, and it's been a game changer. Some provinces, Saskatchewan is going to be releasing a new bill soon. They've gone through the third reading, so it should receive royal assent soon. But the different law societies are trying to keep lawyers in the mix when it comes to requiring a lawyer to be one of the witnesses, which is we can understand why in some ways, but we do feel that it is a wall and an extra cost for the general public to get their documents done, because you don't need it when you do it with paper. So we're trying to work with different provincial governments to help emphasize the learnings we've had from BC since December 1st, 2021, where we were the first digitally and virtually witnessed signature or will in Canadian history, which it was pretty neat. Where I was up at 3 a.m. and doing a signing with one of our customers in BC. But yeah, COVID really changed the game in legal innovation.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, it's kind of, I just wanted to ask you this, because obviously you'd mentioned, with some of the barriers you're currently trying to deal with navigating some of these changes in terms of like the response from the legal community. What has that been like? Because obviously, we're talking about people potentially going from initially booking appointments with lawyers to now potentially using a digital service. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a really big concern earlier on. I was worried that the legal community was going to have a big issue with Willful, and I was pretty wrong in terms of like thinking we were going to get bad press from them and attacked. It's been pretty welcoming, to be honest. A lot of lawyers will say, it's important for people to have these documents, and there's not enough Canadians who have their estate plans in place. So we've always tried to be advocates and work with lawyers. We work with lawyers across Canada to help. They're the ones who create our legal templates and our legal language. And yeah, it's been pretty good. I think from the lawyers that we've spoken to, it's a lot of lawyers look at wills as a loss leader. They're really, in my opinion, or from my experience, they're making a lot of their money are focused on home transactions, and sometimes they'll give them free wills, and then they'll get them in the door to do their their real estate transactions where it's more money, and so I think they haven't worried too much about us. But again, we're always trying to work with lawyers. And in terms of legal innovation, just to jump back into that, the Law Society of Ontario started a program, and actually Willful is the first online estate planning company in Canada to get, we're in a program for 2 years to get our license to be able to offer legal services. So again, it's great to see that they're working with companies to try to help bring, more accessible options to the general public. But it was a lengthy process, and we're extremely proud to be part of this program.
That's great. And one of the things we wanted to ask you, and I think you already alluded to this, is obviously in Canada there's a growing demographic of older adults. Now and in the coming years, it's going to be a significant part of our population. So obviously, a lot of those people, as they get older in life, they start to think about things like wills and estate planning. But for people of our vintage, like, how do you target people in our demographic who maybe don't think they need a will right now, or they haven't thought about it, or, because I think for me, it kind of was when I had kids, it's like, oh, maybe I should think about this now. But there's a lot of people who, have kids, probably haven't thought about it. There's a lot of people who don't have kids, maybe they won't have kids, but they should also be thinking about it. What is the narrative and what is the messaging that you guys are putting out there to try to target this demographic that maybe hasn't been switched onto it yet, but probably should be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the biggest factor comes down to education. There's so many myths and unknowns when it comes to estate planning, and that's kind of how we attack the problem. Is we do a lot of blog posts. We try to get people thinking about it in terms of how can we get content out there and debunk myths and help educate people. But for us, again, our demographic, it's usually people who are having their first kid, buying their first home, or moving from one province to another. We work around those life stages, and we kind of focus on, if someone's having a new kid, we look to, parent groups, things like that. It's again, really comes down to education and putting content out, or having webinars to bring people in. And it's honestly one of the greatest things about Willful has been, we've had amazing word of mouth, where it's one group of parents who said, hey, we got this, I didn't know about this, you should check out this webinar. And again, we are approaching this with a lighthearted, educational kind of tone. It's not doom and gloom. It's hey, you're an adult now. There's certain things we want, like we essentially call it adulting. Once you get to this age, you should have life insurance. You should have a will, especially if you have kids. But yeah, educating people that wills are not just for the very rich, or people who have a lot of assets. It's once you become an adult, or of age in your province, you should, even if you have zero assets, appointing an executor is so important, because if you don't have a will, you're leaving it up to the provincial kind of formula that they've laid out, and it makes things take longer, and it's just a headache. But yeah, that's probably the best way that we look at our core demographic of people going through those life stages.
So Kevin, you guys you have speed to market on your side. You have some great credibility with some of those partnerships and certifications you were talking about. I'm going to put sort of an investor's hat on for a second, because these are the discussions you have with your investor group, sort of behind closed doors, when they're trying to understand what their ROI is going to be and where we go next. So how does Willful, and you don't have to answer this directly or anything, but you can come at it obliquely, like what your plans might be to go beyond this. But now that you have that sort of captured group of trusted users, you must be thinking about, how does Willful scale beyond sort of the product offering you currently have, and maybe it's a scaling beyond the borders of Canada, or maybe it's scaling beyond in product offering. Where are we thinking about when we think about sort of where the future of Willful is? Because that's one of the things that investors always drill into your head, especially in the tech community, is like, what's the next thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get that question a lot. When is Willful expanding to another country? And the plain answer is it's not off the table, but for now, for the foreseeable future, there's such an opportunity still in Canada to make an impact and make a larger impact. So again, not off the table, but there are competitors in different markets in the US, Europe, and in Australia. Actually, are quite friendly and talk with each other and talk about problems and issues that we've all come across. But for now, it's Canada. But to your point about new product offerings, again, we have the will, the power of attorney documents, and the if you think of estate planning as a whole, there's so much, and that's actually been something I've got in trouble with a couple of times because I'm always like, let's do this. Why can't we build this? And have you heard about this idea? This is something that we should try to incorporate, and it's we got to stay focused on the product roadmap. But yeah, 100%. I'm most excited about kind of the first iteration of Willful, where it's the planning kind of side of things, without getting too Black Mirror-ish. If you've seen those episodes where they
Yeah.
they take AI and they essentially create a person's perfect vocabulary and mimic their voice and put them into a robot, like not that crazy, but it's something that I'm excited about, and we're definitely looking at how we can again own the entire cycle of estate planning, where we're getting people to get the important documents, but how can we help how can we help? It's not really the consumer, it's the family of the consumer. How can we make that process easier? Because again, everyone's going to go through it, and it is one of the most difficult things you can do, and it hasn't been perfected yet, right? It's something that we want to we want to fix that issue and make it easy. But there are so many ancillary products or services that we can look into, and probably we would partner with. Again, when a tech company, you're looking at, do we build it, buy it, or partner? We have some amazing partners who are in this kind of similar space or has similarities that would be essential to closing up someone's life easier.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, you know how Spotify tells you every year what your most listened to songs are? Imagine at the end of your life now, I mean, if you're looking to decide, and if I've never told you what I want played at my funeral, you can get a pretty good guess from the data that I've been putting down for 40 years, right? Hopefully 40 years, hopefully 40 more years,
Yeah.
that would then package nicely into a little montage at the end, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, to your point about music, food, venues,
Yeah.
there's so many things that you don't realize that can come up. And again, depending on the age of a person, if someone is much older in their 80s or 90s, there might not be as much emphasis, and from family and friends, family, a lot of the older generations are very like precise on, I don't want to have this, I don't want to do this. Just put me in the ground and have a drink or something. But I think now, estate planning and speaking of death has become a little bit more prevalent, I guess, with COVID and everything going on. But we're seeing a definite need for people who want to kind of control how their end of life comes into play. And I applaud them, because what they're doing or what they want to do is going to make things easier on their families.
Mm-hmm. And Kevin, you've been so generous with your time today, so we appreciate you talking to us about your journey in Willful. But before we let you go, we did want to have a little fun, because we found, I think it was your Instagram bio, that you said, you try to pretend I know things about wine, which is I feel like something I do, but I actually don't know anything about wine. So before we let you go, what would be the one thing you would impart to our listeners and viewers that you do know about wine that you'd want to share so that other people could know this about wine?
Oh, geez. Well,
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I wasn't joking about pretending to know things about wine. I've and it's embarrassing because we live in wine country right now, in Prince Edward County, and I have been to some amazing wine regions around the world. Um,
Let me ask you this, Kevin. Maybe this will make it
yeah,
easier. So, I I've been to the county, as I said before we started recording, and if I'm not mistaken, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are big in the county. Do you like either of those wines? Because I actually, it was almost the best scenario for me and the worst scenario for my wife because she hates Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and I love Pinot Noir and I love Chardonnay. And Chardonnay's back, by the way. It's not your grandmother's wine anymore. So
it's yeah. So funny you say that. Yeah, Pinot and Chardonnay are big, but there are a few other wines that are popular again because of the soil composition. A lot of limestone and whatnot. But on the Chardonnay, I've since being in the county, I also have come to love Chardonnay. My wife hates it, but yeah, I'm always wondering why Chardonnay has had such a weird um, following. But I think yeah, it's back, or maybe it's never left. But I'm a huge fan.
yeah, I mean, a nice oaky, buttery Chardonnay to me, like crisp and cool, is just so good. I don't know. My wife
Absolutely.
says it reminds her of the Golden Girls, so you know,
Nothing wrong with that.
I'll change your mind eventually.
We're a pro Chardonnay podcast. That's where we'll leave
Yeah,
it today.
that's
Okay,
right.
nice,
Yeah,
amazing.
that's great. So super, Kevin. Again, thanks for the time you've spent with us today. It's been awesome to hear about your journey in Willful, and I hope to be visiting you guys in the county again soon. Now that things have opened up from the pandemic, I was there right before the pandemic, but I'd love to come back and hopefully the locals treat me well. I'll have
Oh,
to I'll have to wear I'll have to go in disguise or something.
no, the locals will definitely welcome you with open arms. It's such a great place to be, and if you do come, Steve or Mike, drop me a line. We have a folder for for recommendations on where to go, where to eat, wineries, but also for a round we can meet up for a glass of Chardonnay
Yeah,
somewhere.
Yeah, that'd be
there we
awesome.
go.
Yeah,
That'd
that's
be
good.
great.
Thanks so much again, Kevin, and we wish you all the best with Willful in the future.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me. And it was a great time talking with you both today.
Our pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Kevin. And now, Steve, we're going from an interview to an outro. So maybe you can steal that one on the next pod.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, because you said you're going to steal one of Kevin's, sayings from a vitamin to a painkiller. Of course,
Yes.
it's not very clear, my analogy, but thanks for embarrassing me in front of all of our listeners and viewers. It's all good.
Well, most of what I say is stolen from brighter people than me. So, like, if anyone ever thinks that I'm even I have a modicum of grace, it's due to the fine folks that we get to talk to every week. I'm like the Borg of podcasts.
Yes. What was that? What's the expression? Smart people borrow, but geniuses steal. It's something
Yeah.
like that. I'm probably not saying it correctly.
Well, I mean, it's important to quote it if you don't know it, right?
Hey,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, great chat with Kevin. Really interesting trajectory that the company's been on. Really interesting to see how COVID has impacted the sort of end of life planning space and
Mhm.
how they were able to gracefully and respectfully jump in and help people at that time.
Yeah, no, and I think it's I see a lot of like my own personal journey in the company. We like obviously after having kids, we realized that like we should probably get our estate in order. We started actually going to one of our friends who's a lawyer, but then the pandemic interrupted that. So like we have a will drafted. It hasn't been signed yet. I have to get it signed. But it's just one of those things where you don't think about it, and then all of a sudden you're like, maybe I should. But I think to Kevin's point, that once you reach a certain age, regardless of your family situation and who you have in your household with you, that you should be thinking about that, because I know from talking to other lawyers that, again, if you don't have your estate lined up and something happens unexpectedly, it is quite the process to get that adjudicated, right? And to figure out where these assets go and who they go to and where they should go. So it's it's quite the process. But again, it's great that we have companies like Willful in Canada that are disrupting that space and getting those services to people more readily and easily available.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll ask a rather morose a question of you on the way out because I found it really fascinating what he said at the end around um, all of the process for the sort of funeral planning and like what the person might want in final ceremonies. What would you think your last song would be played at your funeral, Mike?
This is part of your final wrapped Spotify list for the end of life.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, man. Maybe The Chain by Fleetwood Mac. I feel like
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
use that one a lot, but I think it also doubles quite nicely as a funeral ballad. Maybe
I asked a
Listen as the
friend of
wind blows. I don't.
yeah, yeah. I asked a friend of ours this question once. You'll guess who. Well, I'll tell you off air who it was, and he said "Highway to Hell," and, and I'm like, "That's that's a bit a bridge too far for me."
I think that's
Um,
great. That's great.
I asked you without having thought of it myself, so I'll take a moment. Um, Probably "Wheel in the Sky" by Journey. That's a good one for me.
That's a good
And
one.
it sort of symbolizes that obviously the sun will still go afterwards, right? So. But anyway,
Well, on that note,
on that note, everyone, cheer up. But no, it was great to have Kevin on, and
yeah.
we'll bring some new content to you next week. Take care, everyone.
See ya.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.